Hey guys, this is Dawood with AutoMarketplace. Today we're going to talk about an upcoming TLC public hearing that's going to happen at 10 a.m. This Wednesday, September 20th. All the relevant links will be in the description below. This discussion is going to be, or monologue, I should say, is going to be about 30 or 40 minutes. I know that's long, but it's a very consequential topic. But what we're going to try to do to help people kind of understand why this is so consequential is we're going to divide it up into 4 sections. So section 1 is actually going to talk about the Green Rides Initiative itself, a brief history of a 2013 initiative that was proposed under the Bloomberg administration and why we think that's very interesting to look back at. The second section, again, all of these are going to be about 5 or 10 minutes. That's our goal, is going to talk about the current state of auto repairs, insurance, very briefly touch on the macro conditions, including auto loan financing in the EV market and how that affects the EV adoption curve in the TLC industry. The third section is going to be about the taxi medallion industry and probably the likely proposal to issue or at least consider issuing or reissuing new EV-only TLC plates and some thoughts around that. The fourth 5 to 10 minute section is going to be about actual specific proposals that we have that we've written about and just putting a voice to those proposals, maybe explaining it better. And the whole point of this, part of it is yes to, kind of explain our point of view for sure. But another part of it, and that's why it's, the article is titled Show Up, is just to encourage people, encourage as many people as possible to sign up. This is a very important topic, very consequential to the industry. So we hope you sign up. We hope you enjoyed the discussion, and let's get into it. Thanks a lot. So what is the Green Rides Initiative? So back on August 17, 2023, we did a 2-part article. We're obviously not going to read the article verbatim, but we provide a link in the description. So basically, long story short on the Green Rides Initiative, what it's doing is it's targeting Uber and Lyft, which account for 8 out of every 10 legal for-hire trips, so the vast, vast majority of the TLC industry. It basically wants to convert that fleet into a zero emissions fleet. And so why I say zero emissions is obviously hydrogen technology, zero emissions, but I think there's automotive industry consensus amongst a lot of government officials. And I agree with the consensus that EVs will probably drive the vast majority of zero emissions. But you never know. Maybe people start building hydrogen fuel cell stations, and that could drive hydrogen fuel cell adoption. In any case, back in January, and there's a link in the article, Mayor Adams announced this initiative. So it's not a surprise that this came out because it was announced back in January, but the specifics have come out in the Green Rides Initiative. And so what the Green Rides Initiative calls for, and this is the mathematical formula, but it's a simple formula. It's saying total number of trips completed by zero emission vehicles, which will probably mostly be electric vehicles, over total number of trips completed equals compliant trips. So this is what might get lost, though, with many people, is that I think a lot of people might be thinking that, well, in 2030, we'll see where we're at. If, we have 100%, it's a nice moonshot goal for 2030. It's actually, it's much more specific than that. There are mandates every year that need to be reached. And so 5% is probably already being reached between EVs and waves. 15%, it's probably reachable. We're probably already maybe at 10 or 15% already right now. So I don't foresee that. This, starting in 2026 and 2027, this when it starts getting very interesting, where, almost 40, just 4 years from now, they're saying 40% of all Uber and Lyft trips have to be wave or zero emissions. That's a very aggressive goal. And so, this adoption line can't be ignored. And so in any case, in this article, we, all the official statements we share, so you can read that for yourself. And just something to note, Uber and Lyft are actually on board with this initiative, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next section. But here it is. New York has always been a leader in green innovation. That's why we are excited to partner with the city on its ambitious plan to electrify our industry. Larry Gallegos, of public policy manager of Lyft, Josh Gold, we applaud of Uber. We applaud the TLC's ambition for reducing emissions, an important goal we share. While there's much to do to make this a reality, we look forward to working with the TLC to achieve zero emissions in New York City. Okay, so there's two reports we think that are interesting to refer back to. So back at the end of 2022, the TLC under Chair Doe made a very nice and actually nice, easy to read 24-page report going into the state of the industry, how they plan to electrify the industry, a lot of interesting statistics. So for example, it's saying here, estimated the emissions reduction impact of electrifying one TLC vehicle that does Uber and Lyft is the equivalent of electrifying 3 personal vehicles in New York City. Very rich and interesting data. Back here, 1 out of 100 TLC licensed vehicles in EV. I think now it's probably 1.5 or 2 out of 100. This is super interesting where 97% of EV miles are done by Uber and Lyft, and only the sliver is done by taxis. So, that's not a lot of electrification going on in the yellow cab industry, which we'll get to why this mandate doesn't apply to them. And we think that's interesting because back in 2013, and that's what we're going to next, there was a call to electrify the taxi fleet, at least 1/3 of it. So that's a very interesting stat there. But obviously a lot happened in the taxi medallion industry. Here, difference between DC, FC, DC fast charging versus level 2. And so fast charging, and we've also gone over this in some articles, is basically that charging is like Tesla superchargers where in 30 minutes you go to, from 20 to 80 or 20 to 100. And, obviously it takes 5 to 10 minutes to fill up a tank of gas. So, that's still triple 3x to 5x what it does to fill up a tank of gas, but still 30 minutes is pretty cool. Level 2 is just 6 to 8 hours. Not really something that is going to be useful in the TLC industry because most drivers don't have garages like they do in the suburbs and other places. Very rich data. Again, I commend the TLC for quantifying this. So it's very, very good report. This I take a little issue with. We'll talk about that in the next section, but it's basically saying EVs are cheaper to maintain, and they quantify that. But notice here that they're comparing fuel costs to a not to a hybrid vehicle. A lot of people have hybrid vehicles. They're comparing this to just a normal internal combustion vehicle with 30 miles per gallon. Some hybrid vehicles get 50 or 60 miles per gallon. So what does the math look like a hybrid vehicle versus EV? All the incentives, which are a very good point, recommendations, things like that. Very good report. We'll provide a link in the description. This is super interesting. 169 fast chargers in New York City. That number is expanding. It's probably close to 200 now. Very interesting. Interesting that LaGuardia Airport doesn't have a fast charger. I'm sure that's going to change very soon. And so cool report. This is a report many people have forgotten about. It's called Take Charge, a Roadmap to Electric New York City Taxis. This was done under the Bloomberg administration, December 2013. It's a very data-rich and very fulsome report, 106-page report. We're not going to go over the whole thing. We're just going to call it a few things. So it's saying January 2013, not too dissimilar from Mayor Adams in January 2023, 10 years later, Mayor Bloomberg called for 1/3 electric taxi fleet by 2020, which was 4,412. And this number is super interesting. It says this suggests that the ratio of quick chargers needed to electric vehicles on the road is approximately 1 to 13. Remember that ratio. Maybe it's changed over time, but 106-page report, I trust this number. Mayor Bloomberg had a very analytical team. So what that means is that for every 13 electric vehicles, there needs to be one supercharger, DC-FC charger. So there's 2 other parts of this report we think that are interesting. There's a lot of interesting things about this report, but we think this concept of double shifting has completely been forgotten in the TLC industry. So if the yellow cab industry is going to recover, which I believe it has to recover for multiple reasons, a recovered yellow cab industry will be double shifted vehicles, meaning one car does 12 hours, another driver does, or 10 hours and 10 hours with a break in between. So here it says a taxi would need to do 4 quick charges per day. So when everybody talks about that EVs are ready to um, uh, uh, charge quickly or have the necessary range. Very few people talk about, do they have the necessary range, and is the degradation ready for double shifted taxis? I'm not making a conclusion, but that concept has been forgotten about. So I think what's really important to bring up in this hearing is double shifting. The other interesting thing that I want to call out in this report is this key finding. It says TLC regulates taxi vehicle specifications but cannot mandate fuel economy. So it says the TLC does not, however, have the ability to set fuel economy standards. Does that just apply for the yellow cab industry? Is that why there's no standards on the yellow cab industry? Because it's kind of confusing not to drive electrification in that industry, but only in the high volume industry. And so this just needs to be clarified, that does the TLC have the regulatory authority to make this mandate, and is this vote granting them that authority? So I think that's an important question to ask. So we'll now move on to the next section. Obviously, we can talk about a lot of different things, but let's move on to the next section, which is about insurance, the state of third-party auto repair, and macro conditions, and how that could affect EV adoption in the TLC industry. Hey guys, so in this section, we're going to try, it's obviously a huge question. Are EVs cheaper? And it's a question that many people are trying to answer. Are EVs cheaper to maintain than ICE cars? And especially as it relates to the NYC TLC industry. Obviously, there's a different answer to, are they just generally, if you're using it for personal use, I think the answer honestly is probably yes. But if you're using it for a taxi or an Uber in New York City, that's obviously a different thing. So in this art, and before we get into this, I just want to mention a few things before we get into answering that technical question, is that, we're actually, we believe that the EV is the future. We think it's a huge business opportunity for AutoMarketplace, for other entrepreneurs. In fact, our very first video we did when we were called TLC MKT was, you can see Adrian, very nice gentleman called Tanzil Ahmed, who had a Chevy Bolt. And we were trying to educate drivers and fleets about, how is it working? What's this actual real life experience with this? The link will be in the description. So we're pro EV, but at the same time, I think there needs to be a balanced view of all of this. And we want to encourage what we view as good policy. Obviously, we're not saying that our view has to be the only view, but we'll obviously advocate for our view, or, at least want people to understand where we're coming from, if you will. So here in this part 2, and by the way, if you want to read the full article, it's published the next day, this part 2 on August 18th. It's in our Substack. We'll provide the link below. So the only thing we're going to mention here before answering the technical question is you have to remember that Uber and Lyft do not own the vehicle. So it's very confusing to me personally when they get very stressed about saying, well, we'll try our very best to do electric. It'll be very hard, all of that stuff. When in reality, in New York City, 7 out of every 10 TLC-plated vehicles, according to our calculations, is owned by an individual operator. So Uber has a great, and Lyft have a great business, but they don't own the vehicles. And there is this thinking among some policymakers that the minimum wage, because it incorporates vehicle maintenance, will capture that for Uber. I mean, I understand that argument. There's some intellectual gaps in that argument that can be argued. I understand that. So maybe that's a cause for stress, but just want to note that needs to be, double clicked on as well, that if the drivers and smaller fleets own the vehicles, then they're the ones who have to make the financial commitment with this. With Revel, they obviously own their cars. The point we're trying to make with Revel, and this is not to go at Revel here, is that they, rightfully so, have this huge vision. They're making a big bet on electric infrastructure. It's a really cool business. But the main point here is that they have major investors backing them, so they can run losses as they make these kind of upfront capital costs to fulfill their vision, which we wish them luck with. But our point again is individual drivers do not have that luxury, so that's something that has to be considered. In any case, let's answer this question: are EVs cheaper to maintain than ICE vehicles? Again, in New York City, I think the answer to that question, if you own a EV in Westchester County versus an ICE vehicle, you drive it, 30, 40, 50 miles a day, I think the answer is yes. I think it's cheaper to maintain an EV. I think there's no argument for that. I think also where there's no argument is that, yes, it is getting cheaper to buy an EV. There'll probably be a sub, especially with tax credits, they're going to be effectively a sub $30,000 EV launch in the next few years. So no problem with that. I think where the issue, I guess, I don't know, issue might be too strong of a word, where there's a bit of a variant view, I should say, to this claim that the TLC makes in the Green Rides initiatives, is that there's standard maintenance, and then there's one-off maintenance that happens to almost all TLC cars and all TLC drivers and fleets experience. And what do I mean by that? So when someone talks about oil changes or brake pad changes, EVs have regenerative braking systems, many of them do. EVs are going to be cheap. Obviously, no oil changes, less moving parts. There's no pushback to that. I think where the pushback comes, where people don't appreciate, is stuff to do with, what if you get hit? Happens all the time in the TLC industry, fender bender. And obviously, by the way, we use this example of 42,000. On reflection, I could understand how that's viewed as hyperbolic. We're not saying that obviously every single fender bender is going to be $40,000, but even if a fender bender is $2,000 or $3,000, $4,000, which we've heard a lot of EV drivers experience, that's still 5-10x what it costs to fix a hybrid Camry if same accident happens. And that's because there needs to be a third party auto repair network. There needs to be a third party body shop network. You can't get stuff done at the dealers often with TLC cars because, number one, the warranty is voided by the dealers when you TLC plate a car, and number two, the labor rates at dealerships are exceptionally high, often $200 an hour, and so you really need a strong third party independent network, which most TLC drivers and fleets rely on. And so we make that point. The other point here, relating to these fender benders as well, is someone might push back against our claim saying, well, the insurance will cover it. And we've done a lot of articles on this, but just the long story short on insurance is the vast majority, I'm talking about 70-80% of TLC drivers do not have comprehensive collision coverage. That means physical damage. That might not be known by a lot of people. They obviously have the required liability insurance. And so in an instance where the at-fault determination in an insurance claim is not obvious, that could leave it, like in this instance, for example, this is obviously whoever rear-ends someone that's pretty easy determination. That person's at fault. So that insurance company is going to pay out. But even if that insurance company has to pay out $42,000, this guy's premium is going to go up. And, after a while, and they're going to do the actuarial math around that. In any case, the vast majority of TLC cars do not have physical damage insurance. Some insurance companies will charge higher premiums to cover EVs, obviously because of situations like this $42,000 fender bender. And by the way, this is not only us saying this. Moody's, well-known credit agency, the reason why EVs are more expensive to repair is, one, they have more expensive components, especially the batteries, and two, they're more likely than regular internal combustion engines to need a full replacement once they're in a collision. The replacement values for EVs are generally higher than ICE vehicles. This is Moody's. We're not quoting, some random site. This is a very well-known credit agency. Value Penguin, very well-known in the insurance industry, has interesting analysis there. CCC Intelligence Solutions, again, these are very technical, analytical companies. It's saying CCT Intelligence Solutions finding in 2022 that the average small non-luxury EV model costs $4,041 to fix, about 27% more than the average or roughly comparable non-EV models. And then it goes higher with mid-sized luxury SUVs. We use a real-life example in this article. We've done a YouTube video where a gentleman who's a TLC driver is a Model X. He couldn't even get physical damage insurance. And Kingstone, we've done another article on this, is not insuring a lot of Teslas anymore. So this really has to be spoken about when you talk about EV adoption, because if someone can't get insurance and you're forcing them to adopt an electric vehicle, either you have to, in the rules, you have to say, okay, if someone is providing insurance, then this adoption can be promoted. If no insurance is available or Uber and Lyft is not willing to reimburse for that insurance, then the adoption curve, that has to be different. So this is a more, a technical point. And then we'll just conclude this section. Again, I could talk about this section for a long time, being in the fleet industry, in the TLC industry, but I just want to make it a little bit short and sweet for this. So back in 2021, we spoke to Sally, which is a big fleet, and I believe they were the first ever fleet to adopt Tesla yellow cabs. And so they had an incident where someone this would cost maximum $2,000. This happened with a Camry, and it would be done in 2-3 days. It'd be very quick turnaround. There's a huge parts network, third-party network. Here you can see that they're getting frustrated. T+9 days, delamination, complete parts order. Let's move faster at Tesla and NY. And so, and always have a backup. Obviously, an individual driver doesn't just have a spare car lying around. Sally, obviously, they can afford this, but an individual driver can't. So this is a real life example we're using. This is going to get better, but right now, this has to be a discussion point. When someone just says cheaper to maintain, on a basic level, that's a true statement, but on a more sophisticated, second, third order effects of maintenance level, like what that means, cheaper to maintain, this has to be analyzed during this hearing on Wednesday. So we'll move on to the next topic, which will be about the taxi medallion industry and the prospect that new EV-only TLC plates will be issued. And so we hope you found this section helpful. Hey guys, so for this section, it's about the taxi medallion industry and the prospect that new EV-only TLC plates will be issued. Now, this happened as many people know, this happened in March, where 1,000 new EV-only TLC plates were issued. Very interesting auction process occurred, but that's a separate topic. But the taxi medallion industry was very upset about this, and other drivers are upset about this. And let me kind of explain why they're upset, because I think it's lost on people. I think there's one narrative, and you'll probably hear it on Wednesday, where drivers who are currently in leasing situations, what they say is that will the TLC plate cap benefits the leasing company, which is true to an extent, and that every driver should own their own TLC plate, which honestly, I also understand that. This is the issue though with that. You have to go back to why the TLC plate cap, and even back in 1937, why the NYC taxi medallion exists. And just fundamentally, this is a very first principle argument. In order to protect driver earnings in a city like New York or even London approaches this topic in a different way. There needs to be a limited amount of vehicles because there's only X amount of trips. So if you have infinity vehicles, no one is going to make a livable wage. It's just going to be a race to the bottom. It's going to destroy the whole industry. This test was already happened in the 1930s. That's why the medallion was created. So to repeat that test again is very confusing. So I think the former TLC chair kind of said it best. And this is when, the EV exemption to the original TLC plate cap was removed because they were afraid that Revel was going to add, which had just launched at that time, was going to add hundreds of TLC plates. And in a way, that is actually what is kind of playing out. It is not sustainable to allow an unlimited number of new vehicles to the road in a city that is all too familiar with the choke of traffic congestion. What we will not allow is the opportunity for another corporation, venture capitalists or otherwise, to flood our streets with additional cars. Why would the TLC license more vehicles when there are so many that are not in use right now? There's no shortage of licensed vehicles right now in New York City. The number of licensed vehicles outweighs the demands for rides by passengers. These are the facts, and this is the math, and this is our reality. I mean, that's very well put. So the other part of this is the yellow cab industry. So one part of it is people focus on, okay, these leasing companies, and we'll address that in our next section about, addressing that issue. But the other contingent of people that are often forgotten, the TLC plate cap discussion, because it's kind of like sometimes it's not directly, people don't connect the dots, is the medallion industry. So right now, there are thousands of inactive taxi medallions. I believe 4,000 or 5,000 taxi medallions out of 13,500 are inactive. And by the way, the ones that are active are also single shift. So for a truly healthy medallion market, the taxi should be double shifted. So the utilization of yellow cabs is horribly low, and that needs to recover. So then the argument, and a very legitimate argument, becomes, why are we issuing new TLC plates when there are thousands of inactive taxi medallions? And by the way, to drive electrification, why not say, okay, whatever medallions are inactive, let's say there are 2,000 medallions that are inactive by the end of this year. Say, okay, whichever medallions remain, they have to be EV only. That would drive tremendous adoption, and Revel could claim those medallions, or it'd be, it would be a great business opportunity for companies looking to get into to drive EV adoption to our electric vehicle companies. So this is often forgotten, where there are thousands of inactive taxi medallions. And I guess the last point here before we just conclude this section, because I think it's quite obvious the point we're trying to make with the issuance of new EV-only TLC plates, is Lyft and Uber have a driver wait list because they're subject, again, it all relates to livable wages for TLC drivers. There's a driver wait list because they, right now, in order to abide by those rules, cannot onboard new drivers. So imagine you issue new TLC driver TLC plates, and let's say 20% of them are claimed by new drivers or something like that. And yeah, I guess you could adjust the auction, but are they even getting onto the Uber NYC Uber Lyft platform? It's it's not an ideal way to drive EV adoption. So I think the main point here is is the TLC plate cap, and just to understand how much the taxi medallion industry has suffered. These medallions used to be 1 million. Now, okay, let's say that was a bubble. They at very least used to be 400,000, 500,000. This industry has been devastated. And so to issue more TLC plates is just probably, I don't understand how people don't understand, or the regulator, and I know they have good intentions, and the debt restructuring, was much appreciated by the taxi medallion industry. Until this medallion industry is healthy, double shifted, fully utilized taxi medallions, I don't think any new TLC plates can be issued. And this is the primary reason. Now, I will address those leasing companies that benefited from the TLC plate cap in the next issue when I come into with some suggestions. So in this section, we're actually going to make some suggestions. And I think it's important, if you're going to criticize something, it's good form to not just simply criticize something or, state all of these things, but actually not make suggestions, or share your thoughts and opinions. So we're going to go back to our part 2 published on August 23rd. We're going to kind of go back. We're going to start where we kind of left off the last section about the issuance of new TLC plates. So it says TLC here. This is a TLC official TLC statement. It says TLC will continue to evaluate the license moratorium, TLC plate moratorium, that is, and determine whether additional licenses are needed to spur electrification of the FHV fleet. We just shared our opinion about that, especially related to the yellow cab industry. But I think this is where we're going to address those large leasing companies, how to drive electrification, share some thoughts about that. And so let's get into it. I write, instead of individuals and small businesses, we believe TLC-plated vehicles owned or managed by large FHV leasing companies that have the ability to financially experiment with EVs should be targeted by the TLC to drive electrification goals in the existing TLC fleet, not issuing new TLC plates. And targeting probably shouldn't have used that word, but they should be subject to the current electrification requirements. We also believe that these large leasing companies should be subject to FHV lease caps, and we've written about this. And what this simply is, and New York Taxi Workers Alliance has also talked about this, it's very simple. Because there is a cap on TLC plates, and there's obviously a cap on medallions as well. There's only so many of these. lease caps were invented or created by the TLC, which makes a lot of sense because this can be abused if you have a supply constrained asset. And so these are the lease caps. So just basically use the same thing you already came up with. I'm referring to TLC with the yellow cab industry to the FHV industry. Now you can make different numbers up. I'm not saying these have to be the same numbers, but the infrastructure of the regulation exists. There's a cap on vehicle and medallion owner when the driver owns a vehicle. So just apply that same exact concept to the FHV leasing industry. It also should be noted the vast majority of, before people say, well, the leasing companies control everything. You have to remember, according to our calculations, and happy to be proven wrong on this if someone has a different calculation, the vast majority of TLC plates are controlled by drivers. So 7 out of 10 TLC plated vehicles are owner operated. So the leasing companies, especially the large ones, control a minority of the TLC plates. So this is an additional protection, but it's worth noting for the commission, for anybody who's watching this, that 70% of the TLC plate, I don't think that was the issue, the case with the Medallion industry. 70% of TLC plates, FHV licenses, are owned by individual owner operators. Okay, so getting back to the suggestion. So FHV lease caps, that helps protect drivers who are still subject to the lease cap, which addresses, not adding any new TLC plates. Furthermore, we write that the 3 largest FHV corporations that have claimed thousands of TLC plates, let's define this as more than 500, that number can be debated, should be required to convert X% of their fleet to EVs. Now, it feels like, I'm sure if any of them watch this, they're like, well, why does this guy have it out for us? And I'll get to that later, where there's also concessions that should be made to them. But they're the ones, based on our section on maintenance and that, they're also the ones who should be driving EV adoption. In addition, because they have the financial capability to, and they also benefited from the TLC plate cap. I'm not saying that they are responsible for the TLC plate cap, but they benefited from it. So, if they benefited from it, that could also be another argument that they should be subject to these to electrification or zero emission goals. In addition, not too dissimilar with what the TLC did with the stored TLC plates recently, where it said by August 31st, any pandemic era TLC plate that's stored has to come out of storage or it's permanently retired. Why not just do that for the medallions that are just perpetually inactive, these 4,000 to 5,000? Why don't we set a date? And the TLC, obviously, this is up to the TLC to determine, but let's say June 30th, 2024, June of next year, March 31st of next year. Whichever taxi medallions are not claimed or not made active, in order for whoever owns those medallions, whether it's the creditor or an individual, don't retire those medallions. Say, if you want to take that medallion out, it must be attached to a zero emission vehicle. I think that'd be an amazing way to spur electrification. Also, companies like Revel, which I also appreciate, sometimes when we write, they might think that, are we demonizing them? How come we're always picking on them? I think the reason why people are nervous about companies like Revel, people like me, I think their concept is really cool, is this issuance of new TLC plates and saturating the market with cars that no one needs right now. It's going to cause congestion, it's going to dilute driver earnings. That makes me very nervous. At the same time, I appreciate Revel needs to grow. They need cars. So I also understand that. If you allowed that medallion thing to occur, let Revel really make an investment in this industry and let them buy 500 medallions and add them to the fleet. No worries. They paid for that right. Let them, help the medallion industry recover. So that's another thought. So, okay, now there has to be a balancing act. Anytime you make policy, and some drivers and fleets don't know this, it can't be like you ask for something and then you give no concession. That's not an appropriate way to deal with people or negotiate with people, in my opinion. So I say, to be fair to large leasing companies and taxi garages, which I'm asking them to be subject to this, yes, just because they have the money it's not right of me to say, well, they can burn the money, so put the rules on them. That's not a right thing. There has to be a concession to that. So the concession is that the TLC should promise a 5-year moratorium on the issuance of new TLC plates and a 10-year moratorium on the issuance of any new TLC medallion. This will at least get them to say, okay, if that's guaranteed, I'm willing to go ahead with this mandate because there's some benefit to me. Okay, now before the drivers come for me and say, well, if there's never going to be another TLC plate issued, then I'll always be stuck with the leasing company. So we already addressed that with the FHV leasing cap, but there's another thing we can do. Okay, we also believe any TLC plate that is retired via natural attrition. So let's say a driver retires. Let's say a driver can't get insured. That's kind of a quirky reason to lose a TLC plate, or their license gets suspended or something like that. Those should be automatically auctioned exclusively to individual driver waitlists. Now, why I say auctioned? Now, this is also the benefit of the city. Remember, the medallion auctions was a really effective mechanism for the city to raise money for the budget. And you can also use the raised money to help finance electric vehicles. I mean, there's so many ways you could use that auction money. Just fundamentally, a TLC plate cannot be acquired for no money. It's almost the equivalent of giving away a taxi medallion for free. That it doesn't make any sense. So they should be auctioned. But for TLC plates, it should just be auctioned to individual drivers. So fleets can't get into that game. Fleets can't use that auction to start increasing their own TLC plates. They can buy other corporations, but as we already mentioned, 70% of individual TLC, 70% of TLC plated vehicles are owner operated. So these reissued FHV licenses, TLC plates, should only be for individual drivers and be restricted to an EV or low emission hybrid vehicle for the first 4 years before reverting to an EV only TLC plate. That last suggestion is basically saying, let's just say for the first 2 license cycles, which are 2 years, just require like a hybrid vehicle, which would lower emissions. And then after the 4 years, say, okay, now this has to become an EV. So your help, they can, it'll help them financially transition like an individual, that they buy a hybrid Camry, they use it for 4 years, they pay off the car. Then there's so many more EV options. There's more third-party repair networks. So it becomes easier. So just a thought. So that's where, we're going to end the 4-parter. I'm going to have a very brief summary after this, recapping everything, just like a 2-3 minute summary. But we hope you enjoy this. Please let us know what you think about the suggestions, whether you agree, disagree, partially agree, or share your own suggestions. I think it'll be really helpful ahead of the Wednesday public hearing. Hey guys, so just to conclude this article, again, we're going to publish the show up very shortly, and you'll see all the video summary embedded into this Substack. So just a few more points, technical points. I want to remind you of the Bloomberg report that quoted this 1-to-13 ratio. Why that's important is, let's say right now there's a 200 DC fast chargers. If let's say 3 years from now, there's 1,000 DC fast chargers. So if this ratio is still applicable, then you can only really mandate 13,000 TLC plated vehicles to be electric because the infrastructure doesn't exist. And so, as part of this, the infrastructure component of it has to drive the mandate, if that makes sense. So it has to be like, if this situation exists, then that's 50% of 30,000 cars have to be electric vehicles. If you only have 1,000 DC fast chargers and that 13-to-1 ratio is still applicable, then I don't think it's really fair to say 30,000 TLC plated cars have to be electric when the infrastructure doesn't exist. The other thing we didn't mention is like the macro environment. So interest rates are up. Credit card debt is up. Student loan payments are starting again. So the TLC has to be very careful to put financial burdens on drivers if the economic backdrop and interest rate backdrop and macro backdrop is weakening. And so that's also something to consider. So for example, when in 2013 with the yellow cab industry, obviously that industry got basically fell into deep distress. And so that mandate went out the door. And it makes sense because, if the Medallion is just trying to survive, can't really implement a EV mandate on it. So we went over a lot of things. We went over what the Green Rides Initiative, some history behind it, my comments on, is an EV cheaper to repair than an ICE vehicle in New York City? Not generally, but in New York City, but that's what, we're talking about here. We also went over the taxi medallion industry and the issuance of new TLC plates. And finally, the last section was just our suggestions. And so just finally, I want to conclude here by saying, please sign up to this. And, if you disagree with us, if you agree with us, or if you partially agree with us, I just think this is a very important public hearing that's coming up this Wednesday at 10 a.m. Remember, the deadline is tomorrow, Tuesday, September 19th at 5 p.m. to sign up, whether written or you want to speak on it. So we really encourage you to sign up. The links are going to be in the article we're going to publish. Thanks a lot for your attention. And for those who managed to get through the whole video, really appreciate your attention. And we hope you found it helpful. And until next time, thanks for your attention and, appreciate your support.